Hey folks, Killboy here, coming to you live, pre-recorded. It's Saturday, what is it, July 21st, about 3:30. It's been pretty nice, a little slow. It sprinkled a little bit earlier. They've been forecasting rain every day for the past couple weeks, and kind of spooks people. We've talked about the weather, pessimistic weather forecasts around here, so I'm not going to go into that, but that's what's happening a lot of times this time of year. I think you got to take the weather with a grain of salt, forecasting. I'm sitting here watching, there's a cluster of yellow jackets down here tearing into a little caterpillar. I think one of them must have stung it, and he's over there kind of dying and squirming around. And then there's 4 or 5 other yellow jackets that are just crawling all over the thing, gnawing away at it. It's pretty vicious. Those things are funny. They'll scavenge anything. If you kill one, another one will come along and try to eat it. You end up with a pile of dead yellow jackets in one spot. So, yeah, I want to talk about this week. I guess last week I kind of forgot to mention the whole police roadblock thing that went down on July 4th weekend. I sit around thinking all these thoughts, and then when I start recording, I forget half the things I'm thinking. I try to take notes and write things down sometimes, but sometimes I just don't think about it, writing it down, and then forget. And last week I forgot about mentioning that. I had a pretty good talk with one of the Blount County Sheriff's Motor Patrol officers. Stopped by today, real nice guy. He's a regular out here, pretty high up, I guess. He kind of has a little bit to do with determining what goes on out here. And, you know, part of their deal with getting the grant from the state was they are expected to do a few sobriety roadblock type things every year to make sure that the money's being used properly and all that, I'm sure. So they were trying to do sort of a public relations and get one of the sobriety roadblock checks done at the same time. I mean, obviously they weren't expecting to find too many drunk people at the far end of Dill's Gap. I joked that having a sobriety checkpoint at the state line at Dill's Gap is about like having a sobriety checkpoint at the end of a tightrope. You know, if you made it that far in, you probably deserve to be deserve an award. But you know, they just put the word out if any reserve officers wanted to volunteer their time. You know, they were invited to come help out just to make sure that traffic flowed good and everything. Because if 15 people pull up in a line of bikes and they have to check them one at a time through a checkpoint, it could back things up. But they had enough officers, they spread out down the road, and if somebody pulled up, they could just check over everybody real quick and then keep them moving. And they ended up writing like 4 tickets. They had, you know, a ton of officers come out and spent who knows how much of their own personal time. A lot of them were volunteers, so it wasn't a lot of money spent, but tires and gas. But more people ended up coming out than they really anticipated. It wasn't meant to be anything problematic for the people visiting. They're just trying to connect with people in some way that doesn't involve pulling you over and having a negative experience for speeding and things like that. And they ended up being up there for like 3 or 4 hours. North Carolina came in with a bunch of officers too, and I don't know. I didn't really think it was that big of a deal. It was a once in a lifetime thing. They've never done that before. I don't see it being any kind of regular thing. They spent way more money than they did making. Anybody that says, you know, that they're up here to generate revenue or whatever, that's just unrealistic. Those guys spend way more time up here, you know, driving around not bothering anybody than they do writing tickets. Even when there's a lot of them up here, they still spend way more money than they do make money. But you can't just expect the law enforcement to just go away. You know, there's going to be some supervision of some sort on this road. You can't honestly expect it to just get abandoned, you know. So what do you want? You want them to come out here once in a while and do a big thing, or do you want them to be out here all the time with one or two? But something's got to happen, and that's the way it went down. That's my stance on it. So I'm personally really cool with the way things are being handled right now. I think it's very reasonable. You know, there's one or two out here from time to time, and three or four on the weekends, and they're just trying to make a presence without being annoying and bother people. They really want to just connect with folks and try to get their message of sensibility through. And you know, they let a lot of people slide, but if they give you a warning and then you turn around, and he had a bunch of the cars that went through today were kind of going fast by the overlook, and the sheriff was there, and he went down and had a talk with them and told them, you know, this is your warning, you guys chill out. And then a few minutes later, he caught one going like 60, just a couple miles back up the road. So, you know, if you get the warning, then the next time is going to be a ticket, if not the first time sometimes. But I just don't think that they're being terribly unreasonable, and I don't want to see them not be here. You know, there's times when it's nice to have those guys around. Fishy things are going on, stuff like that. So that's my stance on that. I just get a little worked up by seeing people talk about how they're just out here to make money and they're being unreasonable, and I just don't agree. I don't think that's a very realistic way of looking at it all. I mean, there's places where they do, you know, sit and make money. I'm not arguing that. They can, you know, go 2 miles from the patrol station, sit on the side of the highway and pull people over all day long and make a lot more money than they spend. But you're talking about a place that's on the edge of the state, the very outer edge of their jurisdiction. They went all the way to the state line. You know, that's a lot of time and money spent just coming all the way out to here. They're not going to make that back very easily by writing 4 tickets. So just be sensible, you know, think about what's being said out there and don't always believe it. It just gets a little frustrating reading what some people say that have no idea what's going on out here. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You know, I've never said that it's a free-for-all. You can come out and do what you want to or anything like that. I'm not going to lie. They're here, but I think they're being pretty cool. Pretty reasonable. Lately we've been posting up some cool weather shots, lightning shots, stuff like that. People seem to be really, you know, gaga about that stuff, and it is kind of uncommon, I guess. But I was going to share maybe some tips, some camera tips on doing that yourself. You don't really have to have some very good gear at all, camera gear. You just got to know how to, you know, use your camera. Most point and shoot cameras will do all that stuff that I've been doing. It doesn't take a whole lot of equipment. It's nice to have a tripod. You can pick these things up at Walmart for 20 bucks, you know, maybe 40. But you don't really have to have a tripod. You can set the camera on something stable. You know, it can be a cloth, anything, even something that's cloth that gives you a little bit of wiggle room on how to aim the camera. But most of them have long exposure settings. You can, you know, milk it for like 20, 30 seconds. One of the tricks I use, I've got a remote trigger that I can use to trigger the camera with, but if you don't have to have one of those, one of the things that I do is just use the self timer. Use the self timer so you're not touching the camera, shaking it when it starts exposing. So you push the button and it starts counting down, you're not touching the camera. When it starts exposing, it's very still. If there are some options for high ISO noise reduction or long exposure noise reduction, that's the computation that can happen inside the camera to reduce graininess. It may not have that, you know, the cheaper the camera is, the less likely it is to have the complicated software built into it and all that. But if there's some settings in the menu that compensate for long exposure or high ISO, look for those settings. And set them to on or strong or whatever would make them, you know, kind of kick in. It may slow down the processing between photos. It takes it a few minutes sometimes to do what it does, but it'll end up with a much nicer shot. I generally try to keep the ISO low, but if you're shooting auto type stuff, you may not have control of that, but the ISO kind of has an effect on how grainy it is and how sensitive the camera is to light. So if you keep that down, it tends to be a little less grainy, but sometimes you can't, you know, sometimes it has to be kind of high depending on how dark it is out. Lightning is like a strobe, so it's pretty sharp usually when it occurs in front of the camera. You don't have to worry about the camera shaking too much, but if there's any other ambient lights and the camera is shaking, those will be smeared, but the lightning will usually be pretty sharp. But yeah, just sit there, it's digital, you know, just sit there and keep taking pictures when there's a storm in front of you, and eventually you'll probably get a few lightning shots. Okay, so that's 13 minutes, I'm over already. Yeah, that's about it, I guess. Just if you got any comments or anything to talk about, you know, you want to ask any questions about camera gear and stuff like that, just leave them in the comments. And check us out at killboy.com for your photos, and we will see you next week.